Greetings, this lecture is on performance management and performance appraisals. In the human resource management system, you notice it is the central box where it says performance management, and part of performance management is the appraisal process. There are also other aspects of the performance management process called discipline. We'll deal with that when we talk about firing people and some of the challenges around being able to fire people. Other aspects of performance management also include things like compensation and training, but we treat the performance appraisals separately in this human resource management system model. So, moving on to our next slide, what is performance management? And there are a lot of different tools that we can use to manage performance. We can manage people's pay. We pay them at a certain interval and we expect a certain level of performance, and if people don't perform at that level, they don't get their paycheck. Benefits are a way of creating incentives for people so that they can receive a particular benefit and it keeps them there. It doesn't always have a direct impact on performance, but mostly what benefits have an impact on is keeping people at the organization. So that helps at least on the retention side of things. Bonuses are a way to keep people attached because once they get the bonus, the incentive is to continue on getting the bonus and earning the bonus so they can stay, with the company. Training is a way that we can manage performance because we make sure that people are trained to have the skills so they can be the highest performers they can be. Development and promotion acts like a form of training so that people have the skills, but it also creates an incentive for people to be promoted. So a good development system helps people to be ready for promotion, and then giving people promotions creates an incentive for others to also behave in the same way so they can get promoted as well. Disciplining people is really more about managing the workplace policies as opposed to performance, but when we discipline people for poor behaviors in the workplace, typically those poor behaviors are interfering with performance anyway. So even though the discipline is about a bad behavior relative to a rule, typically anyone who is engaged in misbehaviors around rules are usually not very productive anyway. Performance appraisals are the way that we manage performance, and we assess it and we make a determination whether or not someone is performing the job as they're supposed to do it. The performance appraisal is, as we said, it's how we gather structured information about the person, we measure and evaluate, and then we try to determine whether or not someone's job attributes are actually going to work, and whether or not they are able to do the job. So do they have the KSAs, and are they engaging in the skills that are requested of them to be able to do it? When we are developing performance appraisals, we typically think of two major dimensions, or two major purposes, really. One dimension is the evaluative dimension, and the other one is what we call the developmental dimension. Most organizations focus on the evaluative side of things, and the evaluative side of things is basically set up that you get an evaluation and you either get a promotion or you get an increase in pay because of your performance. And if you don't perform well, then you don't get that raise or promotion opportunity. And it's really just a reward-punishment type of situation. It doesn't give you really any constructive feedback. It simply says you performed well, here's a reward. You didn't perform well, here's a punishment. Developmental has the mindset of thinking about what a person needs in order to be a good employee over the long haul. And the goal here is that we want to develop our workers so that they will continue to work for us, that they continue to perform well, and that they'll be able to have the skills that they need to grow with the company over the long haul. And it helps people achieve career goals as well. So if I know that I want to grow with this company and I want to be developed in an appropriate way, I'm basically going to work with the company, and they're going to train me and develop me and get me prepared for promotions and career opportunities. And when I get my feedback on my performance appraisal, they're going to tell me whether I met my goals or not, and whether or not I'm progressing in the way that I hope to be progressing. And if I don't meet those goals, then clearly I need to go back to the drawing board and continue to work harder so I can meet those goals in the years to follow. In the performance appraisal process, like everything else, we start with the job analysis. We want to make sure that we understand all the requirements for the job, that we've basically set everything up so that we know what are the tasks involved, how much time should we spend on them, et cetera, et cetera. And so once we do that, then we've got to figure out, well, what's the criteria that we want to use to evaluate people? And so the first thing we need to look at is, do we want to do a single criteria or multiple criteria? And along with determining whether we want single or multiple criteria, and for example, we always want multiple criteria where appropriate, because single criteria means you do one thing and one thing only. And no jobs are that simple. Very rarely do you ever find a job that is that simple. So we typically use multiple criteria in order to create a performance appraisal, because jobs are multidimensional. After we've determined that it should be, what criteria should be in the multiple measure, we have to make sure we're not deficient or contaminated. A deficient measure means that you don't have all the elements included in it. Let's say there's supposed to be 10 aspects of the job and you've only accounted for 5 and you've only measured 5. It's deficient in that manner. And if something's contaminated, it means it's got something in the measure. You're looking at something that's really not relevant. In terms of scales, we have 2 different options in terms of setting up our evaluation scales. One could be what we call a relative measure, and the other one is an absolute scale, or an absolute measure. A relative scale is basically where we compare employees to each other. And this is a flawed measure, because just because I am better than another employee doesn't mean I'm a good worker. It just means I'm better than the person behind me. When we rank people and when we compare people against each other, all it does is it creates opportunities for conflict and for fighting and for sabotaging each other, because everybody's sort of scrambling on each other's back to try to get ahead and to try to be the better employee in that context. So a relative scale is really not going to accomplish what we want to accomplish, which is to get everybody to be high performers. In absolute scale, absolute scales are where we compare the employee to the standard, period. And it means everybody has an opportunity to achieve. Everybody gets the same opportunity to be the best employee possible, because you're going against a particular standard as opposed to comparing people against each other and ultimately having to rank them. A relative scale is sort of like a forced distribution curve, where in a class there's only a certain percentage of A's and a certain percentage of B's and a certain percentage of C's, and the class has to follow that curve no matter how you slice it. Most people don't do those kind of curves anymore because they realize it's not helping students to be successful, that all they're doing is learning how to make sure they fit within the curve as opposed to actually learning material. Other aspects of the measures that we need to be thinking about is, do we want them to be trait-based, behavior-based, or outcome-based? Our trait-based are based on personality traits. That's not always the best option, because personality traits don't change very often or very easily. Behaviors are about measuring on-the-job behaviors directly, and you can use a behavior-anchored rating scale in order to be able to assess on-the-job behaviors. And so what we might have is a description of behaviors from beginning to end to know these jobs, these behaviors are really good on the job, these behaviors are not very good on the job, and then we evaluate them. And the nice thing about behaviors is we can actually observe them, we can describe them, we know when we see them, and it makes it easier for us to be able to do this measure. And an outcome-based measure is usually about when I have an outcome that can be measured. It means I may not be able to watch the process of someone actually doing it, but I can measure what their outcome is when they've succeeded in accomplishing the task that's involved in the job. If you go to the next slide, where there is a chart that addresses the different kinds of measures that we can have and the different kind of formats, choosing absolute versus a relative scale, you can see that an absolute scale is sort of neutral or mixed in terms of its administrative use. It can be kind of challenging, but it's good for developmental purposes, and it's sort of mixed in terms of its legal defensibility. A relative scale, however, is really easy to do. It's really easy to use. To rank people is pretty easy and straightforward, but it's not good for development because I don't have any really raw criteria to tell me how much better I need to improve to be a good worker. All I know is that I'm better than number 2 and not as good as the person ahead of me. And it's also not very legally defensible. There are lots of problems with relative scales in court, and they tend not to stand up in the court of law, when you use relative scales. And then if you're choosing between trait, behavior, and outcome, you can see, again, trait measures are really, really easy to use, but they're not good for developmental purposes, and they have real problems when it comes to legal defensibility. Trait measures, because people can't change their personalities, it makes no sense to actually use trait measures to tell people about their performance, because they can't change it, right? So why would you hire them in the first place? Behavior-based outcomes, again, like behavior-based measures and outcome-based measures, both of them are sort of neutral in terms of their administrative use. But behaviors outrank outcomes slightly more in terms of their developmental use as well as their legal defensibility. And in both situations, we like outcome-based measures, but behavior-based measures are much better. But there's a lot of times we can't actually measure people's behaviors, and so what we do is we focus instead on outcomes, and then outcomes are okay to use and outcomes are okay to measure. Continuing on, as we are thinking about our performance appraisal system, we have to decide on which raters we want to use in terms of who will be evaluating the candidate. Is it just going to be the boss, or am I going to do an evaluation of myself? Will my peers evaluate me, my customers, my direct reports? A 360-degree feedback, if you think of a circle and the person who's being evaluated is sitting in the middle, you're capturing the people surrounding them, sort of as a 360 degrees. I have my boss above me, I have my direct reports below me, I have my peers and my customers around me. And so I can use all or some or part of these types of raters in order to be able to assess the totality of my job. And one of the reasons why we like multiple raters from different points of view is jobs are multi-dimensional. They have a lot of different variety, they do a lot of different things, and so we want to get different perspectives on the kind of work that people do. For example, as a college professor, I am being evaluated on my teaching, right, with you guys, and so I get a feedback and I get an evaluation based on my teaching skills. But I also make sure that I am being evaluated by my boss for my research skills, and I get evaluated by my peers based on the kind of service that I do. So you guys can't speak to my service, and then you guys can't speak to my teaching, to my research, but you can speak to my teaching. So the 360 that we use is a modified 360 for evaluating faculty. We get evaluated on all aspects of our job, but you speak to one of them, and other people can speak to my other aspects of what I do. So these are a way to get a fuller view of someone's job. The problem with these 360 feedbacks is that they are very expensive to do. They take a lot of time and they take a lot of training. So it's really important that if you're going to do something like this, you're willing to take the money to invest in the process and in the time to be able to do it right. Moving on, as part of this performance appraisal process, then we then need to be able to let people know about what the expectations are for performance. And how do we let them know that? Well, we start with it in the job description, and we let people know as they're hired, or even in the recruitment and selection process, what that job description looks like, so that people are aware of it. When they enter the company, they're reminded of that again. This is what's involved. This is what you can expect. These are the requirements of the job, and we expect you to work towards them. And then when you're in, as you're part of your orientation program, not only do you get the job description, but you're also then informed what that performance appraisal instrument will look like and how you're going to be evaluated. And that's an important part of that process, is learning that stuff up front. Lastly, we need to figure out a feedback system. How is someone going to get the information on how well they have performed the job, good, bad, or indifferent? We want to know who should be involved in that discussion process, what should we be talking about, where should it be held, when should we do it, and then how should it be handled. Who should be involved? Well, it depends on who's doing the evaluation, but by and large, it's usually the supervisor and the employee doing this. What is talked about? Well, if you're doing an evaluative performance appraisal, you're simply evaluating how well they did, and you're assigning a raise or a promotion based on that. If you're doing the developmental one, then you're going to be working on setting goals, and you're going to be talking about all sorts of different things. Did you accomplish your goals for the last year, and what kind of new goals are we going to set? What training do you need to be able to accomplish this? What kind of support do you need? So the developmental process is much more involved, and it requires a larger exchange of information. Where should you do it? Typically, it should be done in neutral territory. This way, there's less intimidation walking into your boss's office. It gives you a sort of more casual, controlled environment, but it definitely needs to be in private so that other people don't hear the results of your evaluation. When should you do it? A lot of times companies will have people go through a 3-month or a 6-month evaluation to kind of check in and see, is this person passing their probationary period? Are they doing a good job? And then usually it's done annually after that. Some companies choose to do annually on people's anniversaries. Some people choose to do it at the end of a fiscal year, so everything is in alignment with fiscal year goals and claims. And it depends on the company's strategy and their values and how they want to set that up. And then how do you give the feedback? Again, the goal is you should be going through the appraisal process, explaining what happened, making sure that people have something that they can read, that there's feedback for them to digest and to hold on to, because it's a very emotional process as people get evaluated. People get very nervous and they get very anxious around it. So we want to make sure we're handling this in a good way possible, as good as way possible. In terms of giving the feedback, the kinds of skills that we would like to see is, we want to know how to do good feedback. So first thing we want to do is understand how our nonverbals can have an impact on feedback. So nonverbals take up about 80% of our communication. Written, our verbal skills are fine where we use particular words, but the words aren't enough. Things like tone and body language and stuff like that all communicate information to people, and there's 3 parts communication. There's the tone in my voice, there's the words that I use, and then there's the body language that I use. And all those things have to be in alignment in order for you to be able to do a really good job of communicating with people. So obviously what you want to do is make sure that you're showing that they have your full attention, that they're listening, that they're making eye contact, all those sorts of things, and that you have a very calm and sort of soothing voice. If you're anxious and you're nervous and you're full of anxiety as you're giving the feedback to people, they're going to read on that energy, and they're going to be also anxious and excited and things like that too. So stay calm, stay focused, and make sure that you're giving really good feedback and letting your body also show that you're interested in what the person has to say and that you're doing a good job. Other things, depending on what we're trying to do, we might use either open or closed questions. We use open-ended questions when we want to engage the other party. We want good flow of information, and we're communicating, or we're giving and taking and coming up with ideas and brainstorming. On the other hand, when someone has not done a very good job, and they are, and perhaps we want them to focus more, they might be getting agitated, and so instead of allowing them to ramble, we might focus on asking them yes or no questions, and because we want to keep them focused, we want to make sure we have their attention, and we don't want them to go off on tangents. And so when someone is really struggling, it's in your best interest to keep it simple and say, do you understand, yes or no? Does this make sense, yes or no? I'm not asking you for your opinion, I'm asking you, do you understand what I'm telling you? Because if someone is really agitated, that they don't agree with their performance appraisal, they might start getting all worked up, and they're not going to be hearing you. And so you want to keep them focused, keep them calm. You need to stay calm, and then you need to be able to go in and say, here's the situation. You have not been performing well. These are the changes that need to happen. Do you agree with these changes? Yes or no. If you don't agree, let's talk about what you don't agree with, but the bottom line is change needs to be made, so this is how it has to happen. And you have to be very clear with people about what you expect. So open questions are about sharing, and we allow them to elaborate. It's about sort of cooperative work together. But the closed-ended questions, the yes or no's, are really when we want to keep people's attention and keep them focused. Other things that we want to focus on is paraphrasing. When we're listening to people, we want to make sure that we understood things the way they intended it. Because as you remember from the communications lecture, the employee relations lecture, communication has multiple steps, and then communication goes in one direction, and then we encode and we decode, and then I hear it, and then I encode something and I send a message back to you, and it's this back and forth process, and things get lost in interpretation. So it's really important that we learn to paraphrase and say, what I'm hearing you say is, you're frustrated because you have not been able to get other people to cooperate with you to get these projects done on time. And you don't know how to get them motivated, to know how to persuade them in order to be able to do that. So whatever the issue is that you're giving them feedback on. It needs to be done in a factual way and not in a judgmental way. You definitely don't want to say, I'm going to paraphrase this. What I'm hearing you saying is you're just a dope and you have no idea how to handle this. Isn't that what you're saying? And that's very sarcastic, it's very judgmental, and it doesn't serve the purpose. What you really want to do is make sure that you have communicated to the individual exactly a way to paraphrase back. I just want to make sure I understand what it is that you just said to me. And then you sort of paraphrase it in your own words to make sure you understand it the same way they intended it to come out. Reflections of feeling is also really important, because when people are doing appraisals, it's a very emotional experience for people, and so we want to be able to manage emotions, and we want to be honest and reflect when people are feeling anxious or angry or sad or mad or any typical emotions that they might be going through. So we try to be clear. You're looking really angry, you're sounding very sad, you're sounding very disappointed in yourself. We want to make sure that we're identifying that emotion, because particularly if someone's getting agitated or irritated or angry about something, by acknowledging that you see it and you hear it, it helps to diffuse some of that anger and frustration and anxiety and stuff that comes around getting feedback that may not be so pleasant for some people. When you're making a factual statement about it, make sure you say it with honest and sincere feelings, and not about being angry and sarcastic. So, it sounds like you're pretty pissed off. Again, that just is going to set somebody off, because you're already mocking them, and it puts them over the edge. And so what you want to be able to say is, it definitely sounds like you're angry. I'm really sorry to hear that. So what can we do to talk about why you're angry about this, and how can we fix the problem? And so you're staying calm, you're addressing the elephant in the room, which is this huge emotional load that this person's under, and by acknowledging it, it diffuses a lot of that anger and anxiety. It really does, helps a lot. The last thing we want to focus on is cultural sensitivity. And we want to be able to recognize that different cultures manage things in very different ways, particularly when it comes to emotions or communication skills and things like that. So be aware that there are cultural differences. It doesn't mean that you hold people to different standards, but that we respect, that people might communicate in a very different manner, where they come from, where their heritage is, their accents, or things like that. So recognize that there are cultural differences in the way things are done. As we continue on, other things that we need to be aware of is that there are factors outside of the control of the employee and sometimes of the organization that can affect whether or not someone can do a job. And so we call these things situational factors. And these situational factors can influence performance. And so as the manager, as the supervisor, as the evaluators are evaluating the person's performance, they have to be thinking about, were there extenuating circumstances that could have affected this person's job? Was there low quality materials? Did we not have enough financial resources for them to be able to do their job? Was there inappropriate training? Was it a bad work environment where they just weren't able to get the support they wanted? Was there poor coordination? It could have been a whole load of different things. The most important aspect of the situational factor is recognizing that sometimes the manager has to look at his or herself and say, did I let you down as an employee? Did I not do my job? My job is to help you to make sure you are the best employee you can be. And if I didn't do that, then that's my problem. I've failed in that manner. So we always should be aware of these extenuating circumstances, these things outside of our control that can influence someone's performance, and we don't want to hold someone accountable for that. It's inappropriate to hold someone accountable for something they could not control. So, the last thing is we should be evaluating our performance appraisal and to know whether or not the appraisal actually accomplished what it set out to accomplish. And of course, it depends on our objectives. If our objectives are purely evaluative, then that's fairly straightforward. Did we get accurate information? Was this information then rewarded appropriately? Is there a good link between the performance appraisal and the reward that the person got? And if so, fabulous, we move forward. If it wasn't so good, then that's more of a problem. Next, if it's a developmental tool, obviously, is the person improving over time? Are we getting appropriate feedback? Are they developing and growing annually as we would expect them to go? And if it's not working, then we need to rethink what we do and change that. And so that's an important metric for us, is looking at whether or not the evaluative dimension is actually it's working, in that it's rewarding people appropriately for the work that they've done, and people are satisfied with that reward. And if it's a developmental aspect, then the metric we want to use is, are we seeing growth and change in those individuals because this developmental tool has been in place, and we're seeing these changes and we're seeing this typical growth. Last two slides is dealing with causes of validity problems. One of the major causes for validity problems with performance appraisals is that managers just hate doing them. A lot of companies don't like to support doing good performance appraisals. Managers hate doing them, and so very little attention is given to training people how to do them right and to making sure that they're done well. Because managers hate doing them, they usually put them off to the last minute, and then they do a sloppy job, and that becomes a problem too. Another problem with validity is that we don't get good feedback for our employees. If you wait until the 11th hour to do your performance appraisal, you're going to have to sit back and think back, what happened over the last year, and how am I going to stay on top of and remember these things? So it's really important that you keep good notes about your employees year round. When they do something good, make a note of it and put it in their file. If they do something bad, make a note of it and put it in their file, and keep track of their performance. The most important thing for an employee is so that they walk into their performance appraisal meeting and they don't have any surprises. They should know, walking into that meeting, I was a good employee this year, or they should walk in going, I know I messed up on some things, and I really want to work with my boss now on how I can improve that. There should be no surprises in that final meeting. And if there is, that's a real problem, because that means that the boss has not been communicating to you all along how to improve your skills and abilities. Another thing is that if we only focus on the evaluative side of things, we forget the opportunity, a missed opportunity to help people to develop to be better. So our goal is we want to focus on what we can do to help people to be better employees. The last slide also deals with validity problems. Other typical validity problems are rater biases, things like halo and horn bias and central tendency bias and leniency and strictness. These decision-making biases, or perceptual biases, are really decision-making biases. We study a lot of these things in the decision-making literature. These are all biases, the ways that our brain try to make sense of the information that we have in front of us. And it's very easy to see how with a halo bias, if somebody does one thing good, we assume everything is good. A similar to me bias, if someone looks like me, then I assume they must be like me, good like me. When we are trying to recall information, it's easy for us to remember either the very first thing that someone did that stands out in our mind, or the most recent thing that they did. And this whole idea of primacy and recency is that we are only looking at a thin slice of information. We're not looking at the whole year of their performance to be able to assess that properly. When we're looking at things like central tendency or leniency and strictness bias, the problem that we have with those is that we tend to lump people together in a certain place in the range of evaluations you can give for performance appraisal. So someone could have, everybody could get really low scores, but the problem is that you have really good performers who don't deserve good low scores, right? So they don't have any incentive to work harder or to be really good, outstanding performers. So their performance is going to slide, because no matter how hard they work, they're always going to have a poor evaluation. And then you've got the strictness bias, where everybody is a leniency bias, rather, I'm sorry, where everybody's getting really good scores. And again, the high performers are going to look and say, hey, those poor performers are getting the same score as I am. Why am I working so hard? I'm going to slow down. I'm not going to work so hard. Central tendency, we plug everybody right smack dab in the middle, and we call them average. And the problem is, people aren't average. There are a wide variety of performers. We've got high performers, middle performers, low performers, and we have to really differentiate the performance. And again, same situation. You lump everybody together in the middle, you call them average. Your good performers don't have any incentive to continue to work. So in all of those circumstances, when we lump people together, and they're all poor performers, they're all good performers, they're all average performers, all you're going to get is a drag to see your performance go down more and more, which is really problematic. This is the end of the performance appraisal lecture. Thank you very much.